Well, considering your father-in-law was a director at a major company, I'm just curious about how much inheritance he might have left behind.
John tried to cover up his curiosity. I sighed internally, but kept a cheerful smile on my face. I heard it's $54,000. John looked shocked. My name is Catherine. John and I have been married for 20 years, and our son left for college this year. Life with just the two of us is quiet, but we get by. On weekends, John joins his colleagues for futsal and is out practicing all day. I work part-time, and on my days off I indulge in gardening or attend yoga with my friends. Even though we do different things, I think we're a typical couple for our age. However, something terrible happened in our peaceful life as a couple. It started with a message I received from a friend who attends yoga with me. And in the message, a photo was attached. I'm at the station now, but isn't this your husband, Catherine? I hesitated, but when I opened the photo, even from a distance, I could clearly tell it was John. He was walking hand in hand with another woman. My heart was beating loudly. Could John be cheating? He said he was going for futsal practice in preparation for tomorrow's match, but was that a lie? I think it's my husband. My friend responded immediately. What will you do? Do you want to come over? After hesitating for a moment, I began using my cell phone. No, I'm good. I'll talk to my husband. I closed the phone and sat down on the sofa. I had no motivation to do anything, and the only thought in my head was, what should I do? I could ask John, but I was afraid to. What if he really was cheating? At this age, thinking of divorce, especially when I only have a part-time job to support myself, made me think that I couldn't possibly go through all that. If I pretend not to know, I can continue living a peaceful life like before. But the idea of pretending and the ambiguity bothered me deeply. I don't know how long I sat like that, but I was jolted back to reality by the sound of the front door. It was already 7 in the evening.
What's wrong? Why haven't you turned on the lights?
John turned on the lights in the living room with a surprised voice. Oh, sorry. I fell asleep. John laughed in disbelief and began washing his uniform in the washing machine. Seeing that, I realized he must have been exercising and wondered if the earlier photo might have been a mistake.
If you're tired, do you want to eat out tonight?
I nodded eagerly, hoping that spending time together would help ease my uneasy feelings. Did you stop by anywhere else today besides futsal?
Not really. Why?
Just wondering. You mentioned wanting new shoes recently, so I thought you might have gone shopping for them.
Oh, I haven't bought them yet.
With that, our conversation ended. But the John in front of me seemed just like how he has been as usual. They say everyone has at least 3 doppelgangers in the world. Perhaps the man in the photo was one of them. However, once I began to suspect him, it was difficult for me to not suspect him. I often found myself doubting him during his late-night overtimes or during his sudden overnight business trips. Bad things do happen, and one day, on my way home from my part-time job, I stopped by the supermarket to buy ingredients for dinner. I realized my phone was ringing, so I took it out of my bag and stepped into a less crowded aisle. The name displayed on the screen made me frown. It was my brother's name. Though I occasionally communicated with my sister-in-law during events like our children's enrollment to their school or their graduation, I hadn't spoken to my brother in years. These sudden phone calls from your own relatives are often not good news. Hello? Hesitantly, I answered the call. What I heard from my brother was that our father's health was getting worse. He suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital. After some detailed exams, they were told he didn't have much time left. My mother had passed away from an illness a few years ago, and although my brother and his wife had offered to live with our father after that, he refused and lived alone, seemingly in good health. The last time I spoke to him, he sounded fine, so this news was really surprising. After telling my brother I'd visit soon and hung up the phone, I took a deep breath to calm my heart. When I told John, who came home from work that night, he looked really sad.
I see. Your father. Don't worry about here. You should go see him.
Encouraged by his words, I went to see my father the next day. Dad, what happened? Are you okay?
Oh, Catherine. I suddenly felt dizzy and couldn't get up. Can't be old age, I guess. Sorry for making you worry.
His voice, usually loud and boisterous, sounded weak, causing pain in my heart. Though he looked pale, he didn't seem critically ill.
Catherine, did something happen? Did you and John have a fight?
I was taken aback by his sudden question. My father gave a wry smile.
You're just like your mother, holding things in. Live as your heart desires, not knowing what the future holds. For a parent, seeing their child's smiling face is the greatest happiness. Realizing what he said, I was taken aback. Although I wanted to talk to my father a little longer, he told me he was tired, so I decided to leave for the day. Though my visit was only about 15 minutes, just thinking that he could be so exhausted from such a short time made tears roll down my cheeks. As I sat on the sofa near my father's room, waiting for my tears to stop, a man in a white coat sat next to me. Are you here to visit your father? I'm the doctor in charge. Oh, I'm so sorry. How embarrassing. I quickly took out a handkerchief to wipe away my tears. Taking a closer look at the doctor, he seemed to be around my age, with a kind face that made me feel at ease. It's all right. It must have been a shock for you. Do you have any questions? With his encouragement, I started to ask various questions about my father's condition and what to expect in the future. Despite repeating the same questions multiple times, he never looked annoyed and explained everything in detail until a nurse came saying, "Sir, we need you." Thanks to him, even though I still felt sad, my heart was somewhat at ease. After returning home, recalling my conversation with my father, I decided to call a friend who had sent me the photo. I wanted to discuss the suspicions I had about my husband's affair. I've been worried I might have done something unnecessary by telling you that. I'm sorry for causing you pain. No, I'm glad you told me. I've finally come to terms with John's suspected affair, but I have no idea what to do. I confessed, and my friend, chuckling, shared some advice. Actually, my husband is a lawyer. He said there are many clients consulting him about divorces due to affairs. I'll ask him for advice. Hearing this, I felt comforted knowing I wasn't the only one struggling. My friend immediately took action, telling me it's best to gather evidence of the affair and that I could use a private detective agency to do so. She even recommended a few agencies and offered to go with me if I felt anxious, making me realize how invaluable true friends are. From then on, between visiting my father and working part-time, my days were quite busy. At the same time, my husband started saying he was getting busier with work. Overtime and business trips noticeably increased, and his suspicious behavior had me eagerly awaiting the investigation results. 2 weeks later, I finally received the awaited results. At the detective agency, I was told in a hesitant manner as they said, "It's true that he's having an affair." I was able to accept the reality without panicking or feeling upset about it. In fact, knowing the truth brought a sense of relief, dispelling the previous uneasiness. They showed me some of the numerous photos and explained his activities over the past 2 weeks. There were also some audio recordings, and it was worse than I had imagined. To begin with, his futsal games are only once a week, always in the morning for just 2 hours. The other employees
always head home right away after the games, since they have families waiting at home. He spent all of his remaining time with his mistress. At times, she would even wait for him at a diner near the futsal court. He deliberately washed his jersey he falsely claimed he used at the game to ensure his lie wasn't caught. All his claims of overtime and business trips were lies, made up just to spend time with her. The most shocking audio recording revealed him discussing with his mistress about getting a divorce with me once he inherits his money, predicting his father-in-law passing away in a month or so. They also already discussed pre-booking an apartment near the train station. It seemed that his recent busyness was related to preparing for their new life together, making reservations for furniture and appliances. They even planned a premarital trip next month. All this left me feeling dizzy. The fact that my husband was eagerly waiting for my father to pass away destroyed any remaining love or affection I had for him. My only feeling was the increasing desire to divorce him. I paid a significant amount to the detective agency, took all the data, and decided to leave it to my friend to keep it safe. When I mentioned hiring a lawyer, they immediately agreed and offered to introduce me to someone they knew. But I had used all my money on the detective agency, and I was hesitant to touch our shared finances. After some contemplation, I decided to swallow my pride and consult my brother about it.
"Why didn't you come to me sooner?"
he exclaimed, annoyed. Thankfully, he generously offered to cover the expected legal fees. I had a meeting with a lawyer and discussed my desire to work full-time or as a regular employee at my part-time job. I was told that they could hire me as a contract employee, which gave me hope regarding my financial situation. With everything now in place, I started thinking about how to broach the subject of divorce. One midnight, I received a call from my brother. He was calling to tell me that our father had passed away. I woke up John and we rushed to the hospital. John briefly visited my father, greeted my brother and his wife, and said some comforting words to me. He then returned home by himself. Everything after that happened so quickly that I can hardly remember. There was the wake, the funeral, and meeting our relatives, and basically I had no time to grieve. Even after the funeral, there was the matter of sorting out the house, discussing inheritance, and handling the legal aspects of my father's estate. My brother, his wife, and I were all exhausted. John, however, kept saying he was busy with work and didn't help at all. Despite my father having just passed away, John went out to play futsal on the weekend. My brother and his wife were visibly frustrated, but they knew about my intention to divorce him and refrained from saying anything. With so much going on, I had to postpone the divorce. It wasn't until about 6 months later that things took a major turn. Finally, all procedures related to my father were completed, and the inheritance amount was confirmed.
"By the way, has your father's inheritance come through yet?"
It's scheduled to be transferred tomorrow. Why do you ask?
"Well, your father was a director of a major company. I was just curious about how much inheritance he'd leave behind."
John tried to sound casual, but I sighed internally. However, I hid my true feelings and just smiled brightly. I heard it's about $54,000.
"That much?"
Yes, Dad must have worked hard to save that much. I just got a call today from the lawyer saying everything's ready. It'll be transferred tomorrow, so maybe we can go out and eat something delicious to celebrate. Emphasizing the fact that it would be transferred the next day, I smiled at him.
"Oh, right."
John seemed lost in thought. The next day, after John had gone to work, before I headed to my own job, I conspicuously placed the bank book on the desk. When I returned from work, as expected, the bank book was gone, and instead a signed divorce paper was there. I hadn't anticipated things to go this smoothly, so while thinking, he took the bait, I headed to my lawyer handling my divorce and explained the current situation. I decided not to return home, instead heading straight to my family home where my father had passed away. Most of my belongings were already there. The things where I lived with John were shared, and how to handle them would be decided later on. Probably John and his mistress would end up living there. I've already submitted the divorce papers. There's no reason to contact my estranged husband. The only thing might be a claim for damages for his affair from my lawyer. However, since they couldn't contact him, nothing could be done at the moment. But 3 days after I returned to my family home, I received a call from John.
Catherine, what's going on? There's no money in the bank account. Where's the inheritance? And where are you?
Inheritance is mine? Why would you use it? I decided to play dumb for the time being. By asking my whereabouts, it seems John has returned to our home. I need to contact my lawyer immediately.
Anyway, why isn't the $54,000 in your bank account?
Did you take my bank account? I was planning to change the account for my salary deposit, but it disappeared. I've been looking for it.
Don't mess with me. We're married. It's a shared asset. You should share it with me.
I wish he wouldn't yell over the phone. It hurts my ears. The inheritance is an individual asset, not a shared asset. Plus, I've already filed for divorce. We're no longer a married couple. Please, stop contacting me. I won't return home. It's okay for you to live there with your mistress. Goodbye. I could hear John catching his breath, but I hung up on him and immediately relayed John's whereabouts to the law firm. That night I received several calls from John, but I ignored them all and enjoyed a drink by myself. Having endured the suspicions of John's affair for almost a year, I deeply appreciated the peacefulness I was experiencing. After a good night's sleep and checking my phone, I was shocked at the sheer volume of missed calls. I assumed my lawyer must have contacted him, causing him to panic. Hesitantly checking the messages, some were aggressive, like,
What do you mean by damages for the affair? If you knew, you should have said so.
Others were apologetic.
Catherine, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I want to talk things over.
Without replying, I left my phone behind and headed to work. In my bag was a new phone, a number John wouldn't know. This would be my main phone from now on. I had John's personality figured out, so I was well prepared. Later, my lawyer informed me that John insisted on discussing this face-to-face. So I decided it was time for a face-to-face confrontation. I expected this and felt it was better to settle matters swiftly. I chose a family restaurant with semi-private booths for our discussion to avoid any public attention. As expected, John and his mistress arrived on time. Seeing John after a month, he looked somewhat tired. Was it just my imagination? I had seen photos of his mistress, but it was my first time seeing her in person. She had her hair up in a bun and wore casual clothes. Her youthful face made me think she was a student, but I knew from my investigation that she was 25 and worked at a cake shop. I couldn't comprehend what such a cute girl saw in a 50-year-old man.
Catherine, what's going on? There's no inheritance and now a claim for damages? I'm completely lost.
Both my lawyer and I couldn't help but chuckle at John's words. The inheritance is what my father left for me. John, you have no right to it. As for the damages, it's because our divorce is due to your affair, and you two owe compensation for the pain you two caused me.
It's not about the affair. It's due to our incompatible personalities. Besides, it wasn't you who brought up the divorce. I did. So the affair doesn't matter.
Hearing such nonsense makes me want to pull my hair out. I knew he wasn't the brightest, but I didn't expect him to lack basic common sense to this extent. The one at fault can't initiate the divorce. It's not about who brings it up first. It's about you having an affair. If that's true, you understand that you're in the wrong, right? Also, I'll be demanding compensation from her too.
What? Why me?
Despite her cute appearance, she sounded very defiant and sharp.
Is that true?
John looked at the lawyer as if he was clinging on to hope.
Unfortunately, it is true.
You said I'd be getting money. I wasn't told I'd have to pay. I'm going home, and since I'm divorcing you, this has nothing to do with me.
As she raised her voice, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the restaurant. It was embarrassing as other customers turned to look at our table.
We know where she works, so it'll be fine,
the lawyer said with a reassuring smile, causing John's face to go pale. Perhaps he realized he couldn't escape.
You know, that girl is quite headstrong. She used to be a good girl when we were having an affair. She was always smiling around me and would cry, saying she'd miss me when it was time for me to leave.
Even though he was talking about their affair, I didn't know how to react.
After we started living together, her cooking wasn't great. She constantly wanted new bags or clothes. It was cute at first, but being married to her was not what I expected.
Even though they'd only been remarried for about a month, complaints about her started pouring out of John's mouth.
I've realized something. I've always been comparing her to you, Catherine. You're skilled at housework, great at cooking, and you always waited for me to come home without a single complaint. So, would you consider giving us another chance?
I was left in disbelief, and I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I never anticipated this turn of events, and even the lawyer seemed too stunned to speak. There's no way.
Come on, I'll change, I promise. I'll never cheat again.
You cheated on me while using the excuse of being busy at work, didn't you? How can I believe anything you say? John lowered his head, repeating,
I want to start over.
You said you were busy with work when my father was dying. He was in a critical condition for about a month, but you never visited him, even once. Even though I was having a difficult time, you were cheating. After he passed away, were you just waiting for the inheritance? I noticed our drawer being opened several times where we'd put our bank book in. You probably planned to leave once the inheritance came in, right? With the divorce papers already filled out? As I listed each fact, John began to tremble. He probably never thought he'd get caught. You had a reservation to buy a nice apartment already, right? But unfortunately, since you didn't get the inheritance, you had to cancel. I assume the old house we lived in must have been unbearable for her.
How did you know?
I have plenty of evidence. Are you thinking that if we get remarried, you won't have to pay the compensation? With that, John got silent. I must have gotten him, huh? Realizing he was only after my money made me really sad and disappointed. If there's nothing more to discuss, I'm leaving.
Wait!
John grabbed my arm as I tried to leave.
Catherine, you're the most important thing to me. Please, I beg you, let's start over.
John's eyes were filled with tears.
I'll never betray you again, and I'll do all the chores. Please, come back to me.
Unable to contain his emotions, John began to sob uncontrollably. Come on, don't make a scene. Aren't you and your mistress newlyweds? Why don't you two sort things out? Let's just move on with our separate lives.
Turns out she's been cheating on me. She seems to have married me for my money. Without money, I'm just an old man.
Seeing my ex-husband crumbling to the floor, crying, was undeniably pathetic, but I felt no obligation to comfort him. People seemed to have heard our conversation, and it was painfully embarrassing to witness everyone whispering about John. Leaving my crying ex-husband behind, I picked up the bill, and my lawyer and I left. Later, as the two of them adamantly refused to pay compensation, I consulted with John's parents over the phone. Having little interaction with the rather shy in-laws who lived far away, this was my first call to them since thanking them for attending my father's funeral. To my surprise, I discovered John hadn't told his parents about our divorce or his remarriage to his mistress. This revelation left his parents in shock, with my ex-mother-in-law being bedridden from the strain.
"Give us some time. We're not sure what to do,"
was their unsure response, making it clear I couldn't rely on them. However, the next day, my father-in-law brought his brother to confront John. His brother, compared to John, was a lively, talkative, and cheerful man. John had often grumbled to me about how intimidating he was during family gatherings. Whatever transpired, his strong-willed brother made John agree to the compensation payment. Then his brother decided John would be taken back to the countryside. Tearfully, my father-in-law informed me of this decision. Since both in-laws were over 80 and had no income, they promised John would work at a factory owned by a relative nearby and pay me the compensation. As for John's mistress, her whereabouts were unknown, but since her workplace was known, they contacted her there. She shouted, "Don't contact my workplace!" However, I spoke with a woman claiming to be the manager and was informed of an astonishing fact. It seems that the person John was referring to when he said, "She's cheating on me," was the husband of the store manager, and she was apparently preparing to sue them. I was assured that John's mistress would never escape justice, and true to that word, a few months later I received the compensation payment. When I visited the cake shop to express my gratitude, as expected, the mistress was nowhere in sight. Naturally, she was fired from the cake shop. She had dreams of becoming a pastry chef, but that's now believed to be impossible. Currently, to repay the compensation, she's juggling multiple jobs, and according to the store manager, she can often be seen at a nearby construction site. Out of sheer curiosity, I took a glance and noticed her without makeup and being sweaty and being yelled at by an older man while she worked. Having to pay compensation for the two affairs she had, she must be deeply in debt. I'm not sure how many years it'll take her to repay it, but she got karma for destroying someone's family. When I told my son about the divorce, he was genuinely surprised, but he said something along the lines of,
"It's your life. You should live it as you see it,"
which was a relief. My biggest concern had always been how my son would react. And with me approaching 50, I thought there'd be no chance for love or even remarriage, but lately there's someone I've been interested in. He's the doctor who took care of my father in his final moments. Every time I visited the hospital, we'd end up chatting, and I found him to be very nice and wonderful. After the divorce, during one of my solo trips to the shopping mall, we bumped into each other, and in our conversation, I discovered that he was also divorced. We connected even more over our similar experiences. We've been out for meals a couple of times, and I always feel very comfortable around him. I don't know what the future holds, but I still hope and strive for happiness in my life.
My name is Emma. Currently, I am working from home and taking care of my father-in-law at his house. My father-in-law used to be a hard worker, but it seems that this has led to his back problems, and he often feels unwell now. My mother-in-law is getting older. She couldn't support my ailing father-in-law, so my husband, John, suggested that we move in with his parents. Their house is a spacious one-story house. Which seems to have been around since my father-in-law's father's time. Maybe it's because they live in such a big house, but both my mother-in-law and John have quite an attitude. Despite being a housewife, my mother-in-law says, "I can't live a commoner's life." And John, who doesn't earn much, claims, "I'm different from ordinary people." I can't deny that they're getting carried away, but they only talk big and do not do their fair share of housework, so I've left them be. It seems my father-in-law used to be the same way. However, now that he's unwell, he consulted me, saying he can't earn money for the house anymore. He knew how much money John's earnings were, and he could not discuss this with mother-in-law and John, whose attitude did not change. Listening to my father-in-law's plea, I started to make efforts for the household. Even though I was the caregiver, I was only able to support my father-in-law when he woke up, which I couldn't do as I was working at home. My mother-in-law pushed me to take care of him, while she did her own housework and went out with friends in the neighborhood, the same activities she was doing before my father-in-law's illness. "I'm sorry, Emma. I wish I hadn't had these back problems." "Father-in-law, you've done nothing wrong. You've worked hard all your life, so please take a rest now." My father-in-law smiled at me with a look of relief after hearing my words. However, perhaps due to the toll of his previous hardships, his health deteriorated rapidly. Shockingly, when we had him checked at the hospital, they found cancer. Both my father-in-law and I were deeply shocked by the news. When my mother-in-law and John heard about the cancer, they were taken aback and expressed their concerns for him. "How much time does he have left? How much will the treatment cost?" Both my mother-in-law and John had many questions for him. It was surprising to me that they suddenly wanted to talk to him, considering they had not interacted much with him after his health declined. One day, when John was at work and my mother-in-law was out with neighbors, my father-in-law confided in me. They asked me about the time I have left and the cost of my treatment, because I'm sure they are thinking of the properties I will leave for them. How much of a legacy will I leave to those two? Those two will be thinking only of that and will try to flirt with me until I'm gone. Because of this, you might face difficulties, Emma. But remember, I'm on your side. Thank you for not abandoning our family. Just as my father-in-law had mentioned, John and my mother-in-law started to make snide remarks, perhaps finding it inconvenient that I spent so much time with him. At dinner, she asked John, "Have you ever wondered why she's always here, not doing housework or anything?" He sighed. "I don't know. Emma quit her job without telling me and just lounges around at home. It's so frustrating. Maybe she came to this house with an eye on Dad." Since I carried my father-in-law's meals to his room, only John, my mother-in-law, and I dined in the living room. In a setting where no one defended me, the two of them continually berated me. I tried to defend myself. I do work, you know." "What are you talking about? You haven't stepped outside since you came here. Stop lying. You haven't earned a single cent." "Do you know why we can live this good life? It's because John works outside. You just laze around at home all day." Both of them criticized me without even knowing what I was actually doing at home. Thinking that I would just get more complaints if I continued eating with them, I tried to bring the meal to my father-in-law's room. However, my mother-in-law snatched the tray from my hands. "There's no way I'm letting a gold digger like you serve food to my husband. I'll take it." I had been preparing meals considering my father-in-law's request and nutrition, but my mother-in-law never complained during the cooking process. She only wanted to be the one to deliver the finished meal. Her cunning and blatant tactics left me disillusioned. Not wanting to cause trouble for my father-in-law, I simply told her, "Please go ahead," and let her serve the meal. My mother-in-law and John tried to keep me away from my father-in-law. Even when he was hospitalized, they wouldn't allow me to visit him. However, I was still in touch with my father-in-law via my smartphone. I suspect that my mother-in-law and John, fearing that I might inherit some of the estate for taking care of my father-in-law, were feeding him lies about me. Though they were the ones keeping me away, I heard they were claiming I refused to take care of my father-in-law. It seems my father-in-law was just nodding along and ignoring their tales. I nearly burst into laughter when I received messages like, they're saying you ran away with the household money, and they're discussing the possibility of divorce in front of me. John has not brought up divorce to me, and for some reason, neither of them has tried to kick me out of the house. Perhaps they want to keep an eye on me. Since my father-in-law and I were close, if they kicked me out, they would lose control over my actions and probably suspected I would visit him in the hospital. Indeed, if I were to divorce John and be kicked out of the house, there would be nothing to stop me from visiting the man who had been kind to me. It made me realize that John and my mother-in-law really knew me well. And so, even as I faced harsh words from my mother-in-law and John, I worked from home and kept in touch with my father-in-law. However, 6 months later, my father-in-law passed away. While preparing for the funeral, I had to put my grief aside and get to work. Neither my mother-in-law nor John were particularly active during the funeral preparations, so I proceeded with the funeral as my father-in-law had asked me to when he was alive. The incident happened 1 week after the funeral. While working on my computer at home, my mother-in-law and John suddenly entered the room I was using. It was unusual for them to barge into my room like that, so I quickly saved my daughter and turned off my computer. What's going on? Don't you understand what you've done? I know you've been using our money. How dare you accept money from my husband? You really are a sly vixen. Excuse me? I had no idea what my mother-in-law was talking about. I have never received money from my father-in-law. What in the world could have caused this misunderstanding? I was puzzled, and now John glared at me. Let me discuss. You took advantage of your youth to cozy up to my dad and get money from him, right? It's sickening that my own wife would do that. I wish he wouldn't have such disgusting delusions. My relationship with my father-in-law was genuine, like that of a close family member. Even the care I provided for him was sincere. I never tried to flatter him for any ulterior motives. I never did anything like that. This is some kind of misunderstanding. However, neither of them believed me. They began packing up my things. Wait a minute. You need to leave this house. Here's the divorce paper. Fill out your part and submit it right now. John handed me the divorce papers. It seems that he didn't divorce me just to avoid me seeing my father-in-law. You are no longer needed in this house. Get out. You jobless leech. My mother-in-law threw clothes at me as she said this. John forcefully handed me a pen, urging me to sign the divorce papers. You freeloading good-for-nothing. After being treated like this by the two of them, I had no intention of staying in the house any longer. Now that my father-in-law's funeral was over, I quickly signed the divorce papers. I understand. I'll leave this house. I'll pack my things myself, so there's no need for you to help. After I said that, the two of them quickly left my room. Probably not wanting to help, I sighed, packed my things quickly, found a new place, and left. When I informed John and my mother-in-law that I had submitted the divorce papers, They both seemed delighted. The two of them will have a tough time ahead, so they might as well enjoy themselves now. Less than a month later, I received a call from John. I was at work, so I ignored it, but soon after, I received a message from him. "Hey, there's no money left in the house. You stole it, didn't you?" I hadn't stolen anything. My father-in-law never kept money in an easy, accessible place, so they wouldn't find it just by searching the house. I think there will be a discussion about the money during the inheritance talks. He didn't respond to my message. It seemed he had completely forgotten about the inheritance discussions. Sometime later, I was informed there would be a meeting about the inheritance and was asked to come to my former in-laws' house. I figured they would call me, and since I had not blocked my contacts, I headed to my in-laws, as I was told to do. It is funny to say my parents-in-law's house since John and I already divorced. Upon arrival, my mother-in-law, John, and another man in a suit were waiting in the living room. When the will was read, the faces of my mother-in-law and John turned pale. Most of my father-in-law's inheritance went to me. The house was left to my mother-in-law. The remaining money went to John. Upon hearing the story, the mother-in-law exclaimed, "That's a lie! Why would this woman inherit most of the estate? The only family he had was me and John. She's nothing more than a stranger." As the mother-in-law lunged forward, as if to grab the man in the suit, he looked surprised. "What did you tell my father? It's absurd that most of the inheritance would go to you." I had decided that after this, I would cut ties with the mother-in-law and John. However, there was something I was curious about and wanted to ask. "By the way, why did you think I was receiving money from my father-in-law?" "Don't change the subject. I don't think we'll see each other again, so I thought I'd ask you some questions. Just tell me, will you?" My father mentioned it right before he passed away. He said, "Emma, money every month." His words were slurred, but he definitely said it. "So you borrow money from him every month, didn't you?" "It's the other way around." "What?" I finally understood why the mother-in-law and John had mistakenly thought I was borrowing money from my father-in-law. Instead of my father-in-law giving me money every month, I was the one giving him money, around $5,500 for living expenses. Wasn't he saying that I was giving him $5,500 every month? He was apologizing for having me pay him every month. What? $5,500 every month? Why were you paying living expenses? Because even after my father-in-law became unable to work, neither you nor the mother-in-law contributed any money to the household. I felt guilty living in a family home without contributing financially. But $5,500? The expenses for the large house and your mother's social expenses. You both tried to live a luxurious life without earning any money. That's why the amount I pay monthly keeps increasing. But I did enjoy indulging in some luxuries like good food, so I stayed silent about it. The reason I never said anything to my mother-in-law and John before was because my father-in-law was on my side and I was content with the good life we had. I also didn't expect to receive most of the inheritance from my father-in-law, so I was genuinely surprised. If the majority of the inheritance doesn't go to my mother-in-law and John, they probably won't be able to afford the maintenance of the house or their living expenses. How can you afford to pay $5,500 every month? Weren't you unemployed? I told you I wasn't employed. I've been working from home. Didn't we discuss this before I moved into your family's home? Did we? It seems John had completely forgotten our conversation. I sighed in exasperation. The fact that John didn't remember means he probably never told the mother-in-law. That's probably why both of them thought I was employed. If I hadn't been working, I would have been idling away my time in the house, especially after my father-in-law was hospitalized. I'm not so shameless to live off someone else without doing anything. In that case, let's get back together. Excuse me? I tilted my head in confusion. The reason I wanted a divorce was that I thought you were unemployed. You heard about the divorce from me and, thinking I'd given up on you, must have been devastated and signed the divorce papers. If you aren't unemployed, then I don't see a reason to divorce anymore. What are you talking about? You still love me, right? You must have been devastated about the idea of divorcing me. Since I'm offering to cancel the divorce, you should come back home. Don't mess with me. Why should I have to take care of you both? Your father was kind to me, so I stayed in this house to repay his kindness. But when it comes to you and your mother, there's no love and affection left. Always making fun of me and being sarcastic. How am I supposed to keep paying for people like that? Wait, you don't love me anymore? Of course I don't. Any affection I had is long gone. John looked more shocked than I had ever seen him. He must have genuinely believed I didn't despise him, even after he constantly teamed up with his mother to berate me. If he thinks that won't make me dislike him, he is mistaken. I let out a heavy sigh. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, looked utterly dejected as a man in a suit explained to her the evident fact that no money was coming their way. You and your mother will have to fend for yourselves from now on. I'm not going to pay for you two anymore. And just to let you know, with your monthly salary of $2,000, you won't be able to maintain your current lifestyle. What? I never considered renouncing my claim to the inheritance for John and his mother's sake. I'm not that naive. I cut ties with them and headed home. I didn't intend to have any more dealing with John and his mother, so I blocked their contacts and even got a new phone. And since we've divorced, neither of them knew my new address. Some time passed, and I heard that John and his mother had visited my parents' home. I was surprised because I never expected them to confront my family living so far away. From what my mother told me, John and his mother seemed to think I was living at my parents' house. They shouted, "Bring Emma out now! Even if we divorce, Emma is still my wife. All my wife's money is mine. I'll never forgive Emma for running away with what's mine. If you are hiding her, we won't spare even her parents." It seemed that outside my family home, John, along with his mother, was yelling such threats. My parents, out of fear, didn't open the door and immediately called the police. Shockingly, John and his mother, apparently injured, a responding police officer, and were taken into custody before they could harm my parents. Upon asking more about the duo, it appears they had sold the spacious house they had always lived in and began residing in a run-down apartment. Yet, unable to adapt a lower standard of living and facing a lack of funds daily, Dave stopped stealing beef from a nearby supermarket. Neither seemed to have the intention to earn money, but were inclined towards criminal activities, which gave me chills. It seems they are currently in jail. I'll be bothered if they became fixated on me once they've released, so I informed those around me about the two, ensuring that no information about me would leak. My parents told me that they are leaving the family home, where they now live and starting a rural lifestyle, and they have been thinking about for some time, so they will no longer be assaulted by the duo again.
So, how much was your mother's inheritance? LOL. At John's words, I was taken aback. After my mother's funeral, without a single word of consolation, he said that to me, who was downtrodden. He probably thinks that because I was checking the balance on my phone, my mother's inheritance has been transferred to me. But if so, he is a terrible human being. It was about $674,117. $674,117? That's it? Well, even after taxes, you should still have tens of millions. Reluctantly answering, I watched John as he mumbled to himself, grinning slyly. What a distasteful smile. I don't know what he's thinking, but things won't go as he wishes. However, the next day, John quickly acted on his ideas. But this thoughtless plan would end up costing him everything. He hadn't realized it yet. My name is Emily Johnson. I got married at 20 through an arranged marriage. My husband's name is John. He's a 25-year-old company employee and the eldest son of the Johnson family. However, the second son, Tom, moved out after graduating from college and cut off all ties. Because John was like an only child, he was adored by his parents. Honestly, I didn't want to marry John. But my family has been running a business for generations. Due to my prestigious position, I couldn't oppose what my parents decided. Our marriage wasn't based on love. It was far from a happy marriage. Unfortunately, we couldn't have children. We married young, so it was hard to give up on having a child. But even after seeking medical help, things didn't go as I hoped. Hey, barren woman. Is the cleaning done? At first, my in-laws cherished me, but after a few years, my mother-in-law started calling me barren woman. You should be able to conceive if you do things right. What a waste of money. My father-in-law made sarcastic remarks every day. Even knowing this, John never took my side. He would just read newspapers or take naps, making loud snoring sounds. When I wanted to work for a change of pace, he said, "If you work, people will think we're struggling." Back then, it was common for women to become housewives after marriage. But living with my mother-in-law was hell every day. Nobody helped me. I couldn't consult my parents or escape this arranged marriage. Yet, I endured every day, hoping for better times. However, things never improved. 20 years after the wedding, when I turned 40, my father-in-law passed away in an accident. After his death, it was discovered that his company had evaded taxes. All assets were seized to pay back taxes and penalties, and the company went bankrupt. The large insurance money for my father-in-law was used for this purpose. We were left with only the house. I thought it would be hard for John, who was 45 at the time, to find a new job, but my parents introduced him to a new one. Thanks to them, he got a job quickly. But my mother-in-law became like a shell of her former self, aging rapidly. For a while, she didn't even have the energy to insult me. But she had a stroke and required care. Because of this, I no longer have the luxury to think about fertility treatments. I'm already 40. I had kind of given up in my heart, but this became the real turning point. John, as a matter of course, puts me in charge of caring for my mother-in-law, and on his days off, he spends his day moping around as he did before. John, I wish you'd help me with your mother's care once in a while. One day, I gathered the courage to tell him this. It would help me so much if he could assist even just one meal on his days off. But John frowned at my words. Huh? I'm working, you know? Let me rest on my day off. I wonder if John realizes that I don't really have days off. After my father-in-law's company went bankrupt, my parents are worried about me and are finally telling me to come home. But what will happen to my mother-in-law if I go back to my parents' house now? We currently have a caregiver come once a week, but I doubt we can afford one daily. Even after being treated harshly and sarcastically, I couldn't just abandon her. John started leaving early even on his days off. Apparently, he felt uncomfortable under my gaze when he lounged around. My wife won't even let me relax at home on my days off. I heard through the grapevine that he's been saying this to neighbors, and that he goes to a spa alone. The neighbors know that his mother needs care. Yet John speaks as if putting all the caregiving on me is normal. He probably doesn't think about how that makes him look. I felt bad for his mother, who once adored John, but now he wouldn't even visit her after she became ill. It's because of you that John doesn't come to see me. I would sometimes hear this. But when I'd offer to leave, she would suddenly go silent. After another 20 years of caregiving, it finally ended when both in-laws passed away. I was approaching 60. I no longer had feelings for John, but had come to terms with various things. I figured I'd spend the rest of my life in this house. At least John was dedicated to his job. Because of his work, I could continue living like this. We might not have been a loving couple, but I was thankful in that regard. John never tried to kick me out. He probably thought it was too late as well. John still left the house on weekends, so I enjoyed my time alone. I even took up pottery and made some friends. For the first time since getting married, I was enjoying my life. But that, apparently, irked John. I'm working, and you're just playing around. One day, he burned the bag I used for pottery class in the garden. What are you doing? Instead of getting lost in weird hobbies, do housework. My bag had pottery materials and my pouch inside. It was too late to save them from the fire. I was furious. Though I felt it was too late, we still had a long road ahead. I even considered divorce. But then another tragedy struck. My parents passed away suddenly. My father died from a sudden illness, and a month after his funeral, my mother followed. I was devastated. My older brother Robert had taken over my father's company. Both funerals were busy, and I was bedridden for a week after my mother's. It must be mental exhaustion. Friends from pottery class checked in on me, but John just mocked me. How long are you going to sleep? Even after my mom's funeral, I wasn't sleeping that much. Those without jobs have it easy, huh? While it might be a valid point, as words from a husband to his wife, it scores 0. The next day, I lifted my heavy body and resumed my usual daily routine. I didn't have the luxury to enjoy my hobbies, so I just got by with the bare minimum. John, who didn't care about my feelings at all, seemed satisfied. Then, sometime after my mother's funeral, I remembered that the payment deadline for the funeral home was approaching and checked my balance on my phone. Since Robert was busy with work, I had promised to make the transfer on his behalf. But John, not knowing any of this, sneered and spoke to me as I was checking the balance. So, how much did you inherit from your mother? LOL. His words stunned me. The funeral was over, and he said this without uttering a single word of consolation to me. Maybe he thought the inheritance was deposited because I was checking the balance, but that's just unthinkable. It was about $674,117. $674,117? That's it? Well, even after taxes, there should still be tens of millions left. John muttered and grinned. What a repulsive smile. I don't know what he's thinking, but things won't go his way. I didn't say anything to him and just quietly put my phone away. I guess John, as expected, read the discomfort in my not saying anything. Well, you've had it tough. Get some rest early today. In the awkwardness, John spoke with rare kindness. But feeling disgusted, I didn't find solace in his words and went to bed early that day. However, an incident occurred the next day. John, as usual, left for work after breakfast. Then, I received a call saying he hadn't shown up at work. I was taken aback. This had never happened before. Worried that he might have been in an accident, I hurriedly called John. But there was no answer. As I anxiously paced around, I understood everything when I stepped into the living room. On the table, there was a paper, a divorce form filled out by John. Seeing that, I instinctively checked where I kept my cash card. As expected, my cash card was gone. Unbelievable. Without thinking, I murmured and sighed. It probably wasn't an accident or an incident. John likely vanished on his own. Thinking back, he seemed restless in the living room that morning. Having stolen the cash card, John probably intended to start a new life, discarding me. The reason he didn't kick me out before was likely because he was after my parents' inheritance. The fact that he stole my cash card was proof. However, I remained calm. Or rather, there was no need to panic. I slowly filled out the divorce papers and took them to the city office. John had sown the seeds of his own undoing. It's too late for regrets, and I intended to make him realize that. I properly informed his workplace. I can't reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll let you know as soon as I get in touch. I apologize for the inconvenience. They kindly replied that they'd treat it as paid leave for the day. I envied John for having such a considerate workplace. Originally, it was a company introduced to him by my parents. While I hoped he'd remain sincere to his job, he was now a stranger to me. Afterwards, I successfully submitted the divorce papers. I wondered why I hadn't ended the relationship sooner, considering how easily I had regained my freedom now. As I was packing my things to leave, my phone rang. It was a call from John, who did not answer when I contacted him. I knew what he'd say. Ignoring the call, I continued packing. However, the calls kept coming. The house landline finally began to ring. It was probably John, but I reluctantly answered the phone since it was too annoying. Hello? When I casually said that, as expected, I heard a panicked voice from John on the other end. Is that you, Emily? Yes. Didn't you call? I got a message that you didn't come to work. You need to contact your workplace immediately. That's not the issue right now. However, John didn't seem to listen to what I was saying. Interrupting me, he shouted, I can't withdraw any money. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Finally realized, I thought. He must not have noticed since he seemed to have stolen it in a hurry. Well, of course, you can't. You burned my cash card. What? Don't remember? It was in the bag for the pottery class. I replied, laughing. John seemed flustered. Then, what about this cash card? Isn't that your mother's cash card that has almost no balance? I wouldn't know. After my mother-in-law passed away, I asked John several times to settle her affairs. I went to the bank myself, but was told it was impossible since I was not an inheritor. The cash card was left untouched with just a few thousand yen. You must be joking. You have to sort out the belongings of those who are no longer here, right? I told you to do it eventually. Don't blame others. So, what should I do with this cash card? Unless I go and take care of it, there's nothing you can do. John seemed to be complaining about something in response to what I said. However, I had no intention of replying and remained silent. It seemed that John, losing patience, had returned to the bank counter and was explaining the situation to the bank employee. I seemed to have accidentally burned the cash card. Can't someone else handle it on my behalf? I'm on the phone with my wife now. It seemed like he put the call on speaker, as I could hear the troubled voice of the bank clerk. I was puzzled by what was being said. John, what are you talking about? Someone else can't just do that for you. What? Our divorce papers were accepted earlier. Thanks for preparing it. Goodbye. I said what I wanted to say and hung up the phone. My voice must have been heard by the bank clerk. I wonder if John's face is pale or red right now. Just imagining it made me laugh. Now, I should leave the house before he returns. With that thought, I quickly packed my things. I then left the house. My destination was my family home, which had become vacant after my parents passed away. In fact, I had inherited that house too. The assets of my mother, who ran a business, amounted to $87,692,000. But inheriting such a large amount in cash would not end well if John found out, especially since we had no children. Therefore, I only inherited $6,745,550, enough to live comfortably. The rest included the family home, my mother's beautifully preserved kimonos, and my father's antiques. If appraised, these items would be worth a significant amount. Of course, I had Robert's, my brother's, permission. After getting married, Robert moved out. He was concerned about the family home being vacant. He has children and also took over the family business. He was grateful to only inherit cash. Through discussions, we had peacefully settled the inheritance. After arriving at my parents' home, I informed Robert that I had divorced John and would be living there. If Emily stays at the family home, it won't be vacant, which is reassuring. But are you really divorcing John? Are you sure about that, Emily? Yes. We don't have children, and both our parents have passed away. If both of us want to divorce, I think it's for the best. I want to restart my life, and I have no regrets. Robert was concerned about me being alone, but it's better than living as John's servant for life. If I could spend the rest of my life in this house where I spent time with my family, I would be happy even if I were alone. John kept calling me again and again after that. However, he seemed confused and didn't realize I was at my family home, so he never came. That day, I spent my time peacefully alone. The house without my family was indeed lonely, but I felt truly relieved. The next day, I reluctantly headed out to make a bank transfer. John had my ID. It was a bit troublesome, but I headed out at 6 a.m., assuming he would be asleep, to get it. As I returned home, I was met with the smell of alcohol as soon as I opened the door. Ugh, I thought, making a face of disgust. Entering the living room, beer cans were scattered everywhere. To add to that, my ID was torn up and left on the table. This is terrible. No matter how angry one is, who tears up someone's ID like that? I gathered the torn pieces, put them in my bag, also took a few clothes, and returned home once. Then I headed to the bank. As I approached, I was called out. Emily. John. To my surprise, John was lying in wait for me. I noticed your ID was gone, so I thought you'd come here, haha. Whether I come here or not is none of your business. Don't be like that. We've been together for years. Even though the divorce is finalized, he dares to say such things. I ignored him and entered the bank. Even then, John kept trying to woo me. However, I continuously ignored him. Then, it happened. Isn't that John and Emily? Someone approached and called out to us. Tom? Why are you here? It was John's younger brother, Tom. Both John and I were surprised by the unexpected reunion with Tom, who we'd been mostly estranged from, only meeting at funerals. In the 40 years since I married John, this was about the third time I saw him. Tom seemed to have wanted to sever ties, but his parents had pleaded with him to at least attend family events. We had met at my mother-in-law's funeral just a few years ago, so he recognized us. Yeah. I'm here for Mom's inheritance. I was planning to check the balance and then inform you both. Mom's? John's eyes lit up. I was also surprised. I thought it was just a few dollars left in her account, but according to Tom, there were also unclaimed investment trusts from a long time ago and a safe deposit box rented when our father-in-law was alive. Tom had heard about this from my mother-in-law. Before she passed, she had said, if something happens, you handle the paperwork. It seems Tom had been busy and only got around to it now. Tom looked at me and John with an apologetic expression. What is it? Well, in the safe deposit box, along with the jewels, there was a letter. Mom said she's leaving all her assets to Emily Johnson. What? I was taken aback by Tom's words. But John seemed even more surprised than me. Tom pulled out a letter from the file he had. I recognized that envelope, because it was the one I bought for my mother-in-law when she asked me. Clearly written on it in shaky handwriting was, all the jewels and assets in the safe deposit box are to be left to Emily. I remembered my mother-in-law painstakingly writing it. Is that the letter? Should I bring it out? I might say, but I was coldly told, it's none of your business. Maybe she wrote this at that time. I involuntarily covered my mouth. Emily took care of our mother all by herself, right? She wrote that she's sorry for being mean to her. She probably told me to handle this because she thought John would cover it up. John, sitting next to me, turned beet red and started trembling. Well, I never really intended to inherit, but I guess I have to go through the process since I'm technically an heir. It's just going to be in Emily's name, so that's no problem, right? Tom said matter-of-factly, probably unaware that we were divorced. After that, I was called to the counter. John, though, seemed to have no energy to follow. Even though he didn't have anything urgent, he just sat in the lobby. I managed to reissue my cash card, transfer money to the funeral parlor all on the same day. Well then, I'll be going. I'll contact you again, Emily. Leaving behind a stunned John and Tom, I safely returned home. I received a formal contact from Tom later. John was ranting that the letter was invalid, but Tom persuaded him saying, respect Mom's wishes. However, John wasn't convinced, so he consulted with a lawyer. While my mother-in-law's letter wasn't recognized as an official will, the lawyer suggested settling it through discussion considering fees and other costs. Eventually, John was convinced to inherit the house. The mutual funds weren't that high in value, and he reluctantly gave up on the jewelry and other assets. Eventually, I formally inherited my mother-in-law's assets. If Emily gets Mom's inheritance, then I should get my mother-in-law's, right? John reportedly argued this with the lawyer, but it was a different story. It was embarrassing. Even when calmed by the lawyer, he wasn't satisfied. Eventually, he found out I was at my parents' house and showed up. I was wrong. Let's start over. Realizing he would get nothing, he knelt down at the entrance and begged to be remarried. What do you mean start over? There was never any love between us to begin with. What's there to restart? I finally told John what I had always wanted to say. He went silent, seemingly full of regret, which made me smile. At least you still have the house, right? Oh, did you notify your workplace? If you're that desperate for money, work hard. Don't lose your job, okay? I conveyed just that and closed the door. It was finally over. My bank account showed what was left by our two mothers. With that, I believed I would be able to live comfortably. John, in the end, was absent from work without notice and got fired. So I warned him. His only redeeming quality, his passion for work, was lost. Thinking back, maybe he worked hard not out of responsibility, but to maintain his own dignity. Without anyone left to show his dignity to, and without the easy money he had hoped for, it wouldn't be surprising if he had lost his will to live. We've been together for many years, and as you can imagine, I was worried, but that's all. I have no intention of helping him. I truly apologize for causing such inconvenience to you, Emily. Only Tom apologized to me, knowing everything. He also told me you don't have to deal with John anymore. I believe he must be living happily now, having recognized the dysfunction of that family early on and leaving home at a young age, sparing his family from getting involved with that house. I heard that John has become a recluse, but he's of an age to receive a pension, so he should manage somehow. He had the nerve to say to me, "Let's start over." He should just think about starting over on his own. After that, I started attending pottery classes again. My friends were glad to see me return, and I never thought that days spent solely for myself could be this enjoyable. I even met someone wonderful at that pottery class. I'm done with marriage, but I've started to think that perhaps being with someone who loves me might be better than being alone forever. Even though I sometimes feel it's too late, just like during my divorce, I believe it's never too late as long as I'm alive. No matter when, no matter the age, anyone can find happiness. That's what I believe.